Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 13th of May. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, turn election 2016 into Operation Glass-Steagall, and Prayer for Palmyra concert celebrates victory of hope over terror. So first, turn election 2016 into Operation Glass-Steagall. Craig, we're going to talk about the election campaign we're going to run for the next 8 weeks. It's on, as we foreshadowed last week. And before we do though, we just want to remind viewers about campaigns we've run in the past. And when you see the content of those campaigns, what the CEC has done in the past, you realise why we're qualified to say what we say about the financial system and related matters. Because we've been warning about the general economic crisis we're in for long before it started.
These are before the GFC, Robert.
That's right.
2004.
So what we're going to do is show the viewers a couple of ads that we put on television in 2004, as Craig said. The first one is from our current Queensland Senate leader, Jan Pacullis. She's our lead Senate candidate in Queensland. In 2004, she ran for the seat of Dawson in Mackay, and she ran against the sitting National, Deanne Kelly, who will feature in this ad. And Jan you'll hear Jan talk about the coming depression that the CEC had actually produced a book for, right? So have a look at this ad.
Hi, Jan Pacullis. Would you like more globalisation, more competition policy, more destroyed industries like dairy and sugar, more job losses, less water and less healthcare? If so, vote for Deanne Kelly or Labor because they both support economic rationalism. Or vote for one of the gaggle of populists and independents who are out there to soak up discontent. The establishment loves these impotent squawkers who don't have a clue how to turn this country around. This country and the world are headed for a horrible depression. For the world and Australia, we must dump globalisation. We must re-regulate the economy and establish a new national bank, for which the CEC has already written the legislation, and use it to fund great water, rail, power and other infrastructure projects to launch a real economic recovery in this country. If you thought the establishment was upset about Pauline Hanson, who had no idea what to do, vote for me this federal election, then watch the establishment scream and watch a serious debate begin about national economic policy. Don't you think it's long overdue?
Authorised Jan Pacullis, Citizens Electoral Council, Mackay.
There you go, Craig. And Jan is now based in Brisbane, though. She's no longer in Mackay, and she's, like I said, the Senate candidate. But you can see there that the issues that we were on about then, we're on about now. But what we're going to talk about now is not the crash is coming. We're in a general economic depression now. Globally, we're talking about, and Australia is about to catch up. But of course, the solutions are exactly what Jan's gone through.
Yep.
Right? Great water, big development projects, a national bank to fund it, put people into jobs, and the CEC is campaigning on that again. The second ad is from our Western Australian lead Senate candidate, Jean Robinson, and she was a Senate candidate also back in 2004. We ran some ads to support House of Representatives candidates at the time, but this is a shorter ad where Jean is just summarising the issues.
Hi, I'm Jean Robinson. Stop voting for what you don't want. The lesser of two evils is still evil. For nation-building policies that once made us a lucky country, vote CEC in this election for a real future.
Authorised Jean Robinson, CEC Perth.
Craig, this is, like I said, when you go back and look at what the CEC has campaigned on in the past, we have the credentials for the situation that we're in now.
Robbie, it's an opportunity lost. Look, it's 12 years ago. We could have had most of those projects built by now.
Yep.
The political, economic landscape of Australia could have been completely changed from what it is today. But this is the lack of vision that you have in the major parties. And what you see in this very first week of the election campaign is very simple. You have both these members of, both the leaders of the Labor Party and the Liberal Party coming out and saying, in effect, trust me.
Yeah.
And once a politician comes out and says, trust me, you have to say, well, why are they saying that? Is because what you have in the population today, and we're getting an enormous amount of this feedback, that people don't like the major parties. They don't. I mean, there's a certain element that'll just go along and vote, and I've always voted Labor, and I'll stick the box.
Think about it. Yep.
But there's a growing, larger percentage of the population. The last election it was 32% that voted for other than the major parties, and I'm including the Greens in that. But this particular election, we're getting feedback to say that's even greater, and why wouldn't it be? Because as you've seen, as people can really think about it, there's no difference between the major parties.
Yep.
At the end of the day, they both support the international global financial banking cartels that have brought us the global financial crisis, that have brought us the speculative debt that is crippling countries. Nothing has fundamentally changed as far as the global financial crisis is concerned, and neither one of the parties are actually serious about dealing with what is required in this country for things like Glass-Steagall, for example. I mean, Bill Shorten came out publicly here in Victoria and said there's no way that the Labor Party is going with Glass-Steagall. Of course, Malcolm Turnbull, former merchant banking career with Goldman Sachs and so forth, he's not going to support the idea of introducing Glass-Steagall, whereby you protect the legitimate, necessary banking system, the ordinary, boring banking as we call it, which is your housing, mortgages and your deposits and savings, from the predatory merchant banking, investment banking, but also the other problems that we have today of this vertical integration, where you have stockbroking houses, insurance companies, all tied together, so that the interests of the customers are no longer being supported just by boring banking, but the profits necessary by that parasitical investment merchant banking aspect of which we've seen growing up in the last 20 years.
Well, Craig, we'll talk about that after the break. But what you're saying is they're not going to support it. That's an absolute urgent necessity. Therefore, the solution has to come from outside the major parties, and that's why people have to think about. If you want to actually change something, you can't vote the way you always have.
And we've written the legislation for a national bank, for example, Robbie, and we've also just published 200,000 copies of this paper going through the issue of why defeat the Crown's killer bail-in. This is the policy to steal people's deposits. We've been leading the political fight on this for a long time now.
Well, if you turn to the back page of that, what we have on, which people can get a copy of, but you can also find on our website, we've identified our Senate team. We're running a full slate in every state, plus the Northern Territory, and you're the lead Senate candidate here in Victoria. As I said, Jean Robinson is the lead candidate in Western Australia, and Jan in Queensland, Anne Lawler in New South Wales, etc. They're identified on our website. And that team is committed to turning this election into a debate about Glass-Steagall, right? Because we can't promise we're going to win this. With the way the media works, those ads when we did them in 2004, Craig, cost a huge amount of money, which we don't have now. It was an unusual thing at the time. But you're not going to get media coverage for these issues because the media is sewn up, right?
Robbie, when you look at these election campaigns, right, they're all about, for the major parties, votes and power, get votes and power, votes and power. And then people try and impose that on us as a political party. And I always say to people, look, the real issue is day one after the election campaign. What has we as an organisation got left on the ground? How many more people understand what the real policy issues are? What Glass-Steagall is? That means we have to use this opportunity when people have a bit of a heightened sense that there's a political fight going on for elections about what the real issues are. So
then you've got an educated populace that can hold any government to account, right, at all times, not just an election
As you
time.
see and I've been around for 28 years in this political landscape of Australia, and I've seen many, many groups, from Pauline Hanson, even Clive Palmer, rise up and people flock to him and say, here's the great saviour or she's the great saviour. But the policy depth that these people have is just about zero.
Yeah.
So, but unlike us as a political party, it's been around for 28 years. And what's shown in those ads is that we represent the same policies, the same policy direction, but the same principle of fighting for the common welfare, what we call the common good of the people. That is, the government is for and of by the people for the purposes of developing the wealth, the continued wealth and prosperity of the population, not for private bankers. And there's a big, big difference. And that's why in many cases we don't get the coverage that is necessary for us to really penetrate the population when we rely on a grassroots movement.
But we have the benefit of this show, so let's take a break and use it more when we come back afterwards.
You've been watching the CEC Report, the weekly TV show of the Citizens Electoral Council of Australia. What can people do to find out more, Robert?
Well, they can get on our website, www.cecaust.com.au, or they can call our toll-free number for Lisa to order a copy of this, the Australian Alert Service, which is our weekly publication where we write up all the material we use. That number is 1-800-636-432. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're talking about how we're going to turn election 2016 into Operation Glass-Steagall. And Craig, before the break, we were talking about the slate of candidates we're running are committed to making this election a debate about Glass-Steagall. So what we intend to do, now I'll give some marching orders to the viewers, because we need every viewer to participate. If you support Glass-Steagall, you need to participate in this campaign. But first of all, just to put it in context, the US election campaign that's still running now, on the Democratic side at least, has been dominated by this issue of Glass-Steagall. So you hear about Donald Trump, etc. But if you follow the Democratic side of the debate, two candidates, Martin O'Malley and now Bernie Sanders, stalked Hillary Clinton on this issue and showed her up. It's the reason Bernie Sanders got the support he did, because he came out early and said, we need to break up the banks. And everyone in America knows that's the issue. So this is a huge debate in the United States. It's a huge issue in the United Kingdom, where in 2013 they almost amended legislation to enact Glass-Steagall and only were narrowly defeated by the City of London interests. So it's a huge issue there. Any political animal in Australia that works in the major parties, we know about it. The minute when Tony Abbott was put on the spot about Glass-Steagall last year, he instantly answered it because he knew exactly what it was. Bill Shorten instantly answered it the other week because he knew exactly what it was. Those people know this is a huge debate overseas. Only the CEC is talking about it in Australia. Only the CEC. So we have to change that, right? We know this has got to become the same level of debate here. Why? Because if you watched Four Corners a week and a half ago, if you doubted it before then, know this: the banks are going to crash. As surely as day becomes night and the sun sets in the west, the banks are going to crash. Our banks are in so much trouble with their exposure to the property market, which is the biggest property bubble ever in the history of the world, right? They will not survive this, and therefore you will not survive this. And you've got two choices: bail-in, where they steal your savings to prop their banks up, or Glass-Steagall. And you've got all umpteen other warnings on an international level now about the state of the international financial system. So we can intervene on this situation now. It's much better, Craig, as experts have pointed out many times, get Glass-Steagall implemented before a crisis so it's ready to go and can protect us than during a crisis.
Yeah, and as I was saying a couple of weeks ago, Robbie, our parliament's full of lawyers.
Yeah,
it's full of bankers. Right. These guys would know how to do this if they has a political will to do it. So it's not a question of, sounds like a very difficult idea, how are we going to do this? No, it's purely a political idea. And that's what Franklin Roosevelt faced in the 1930s. And that's why Ferdinand Pecora in his Pecora Commission was able to help Franklin Roosevelt, in fact, by pointing out the criminality of the banks.
And that got the public on side.
And what he pointed out was this thing called vertical integration. This is what we've got in our banking system, whereby you might want to explain it a bit more.
So we've got a letter. The other day, a few weeks ago, we highlighted this letter from Scott Morrison to another member of Parliament responding to this question. He's written another one, so that's good, and this is all part of Operation Glass-Steagall, Craig. In this particular letter to Wyatt Roy, who passed it on to the Fletchers in Burpengary, who'd asked about this, Scott Morrison made the point that Australia's financial system doesn't need Glass-Steagall separation because, quote, it already exhibits a high degree of structural separation. And what he's saying is that most foreign banks branches in Australia are investment banks, but they don't do much retail banking. And Australia's big four banks are largely commercial banks and have very small investment banking divisions. However, he only talked about investment banking, whereas we put on the front page of our alert service last week, and you can see this in the case of the Commonwealth Bank, this graphic. What our banks do have, their investment banking divisions may be small compared to their overall size, but I suspect they're quite large, compared to other investment banks. But it's not just investment banks they have. They have insurance, stockbroking, and wealth management as well under the same umbrella. And Glass-Steagall is all about getting rid of all those separating all of those from the deposits, because there's always a risk.
I don't think have they gone into funeral services yet, Robbie?
Well, in this week's in the Australian Financial Review of today, the 13th of May, in an article, Fear and Loathing in the Banking Industry, the chairmen fight back, who are arcing up about the Royal Commission call. They're talking about the conflict of interests that are inherent in a vertically integrated structure, right? And the Fin Review journalist Joanne Gray writes, the conflicts are made more acute by vertical integration in the industry, which sees products manufactured by insurance and wealth management divisions sold to bank customers.
Like funeral plans being sold to bank customers.
That's right. And then the chairman of Westpac, in the next paragraph, responds to this. He admits, quote, I can remember times from when I was a CEO and the pressure is on the last quarter. So you are saying things to groups of staff like, it's really important you meet your targets this month. Do this, this and this. So you have other divisions of the bank manufacture these risky products that the retail division of the bank is expected to flog to customers and pressured to flog to customers.
Actually, Robbie, if you go into some of the banks today, the tellers
That's
ask
right.
you, do you have life insurance? And they've been instructed that they have to sell, instead of taking your deposits and your money and doing the boring banking, they're there as salespeople selling products for other branches of the bank.
In 1930, the number one reason Glass-Steagall was enacted in the United States in 1933, Craig, was because of that. The biggest bank in the world, National City Bank, was getting its salesmen to sell products to its own depositors. It made its own market. It actually encouraged everyone to make $1 deposits, so it had lots of depositors, and then they would go and sell them these products. They even made them sell products to their own staff, right, that were risky products, crap products that ruined their lives. And it was that, exactly the thing that our banks are big in now, that was the reason for Glass-Steagall. Not derivatives, etc. That all came later. That was the reason. So, in other words, by that metric that the Fin Review highlights today, Glass-Steagall is absolutely urgent for Australia. So therefore, here's what Operation Glass-Steagall is. You write a letter first to your sitting Member of Parliament, asking them, do you support Glass-Steagall to protect Australians from a banking crash? And if you don't think you can explain Glass-Steagall, don't worry about it. Just write it in there, because if they don't know what it already is, and they probably do, they'll ask the Treasurer to tell them what it is.
We had it in the front page, or one of the large pages of the Australian newspaper back in 2013, Robert.
That's right.
And we had 600 people sign this ad. It wasn't, politicians don't miss this sort of stuff.
So they most likely know what it is. So write them that letter, because then they're forced to not just look at Glass-Steagall, Craig, they're forced to look at the question of, are our banks in trouble? Also, when the other candidates are declared in your electorate, which is by the 10th of June, they should all be known, and you can find them on the Electoral Commission website, write them similar letters. And then thirdly, what we're asking people to do is they have all these public campaign events that you see on the news every day where Bill Shorten and Turnbull are going to these places. If you get to go along, if you know where one is, go along and ask them publicly about Glass-Steagall. What we're going to create is an intense behind-the-scenes discussion about Glass-Steagall, and if it gets intense enough, it will break out into the public. That's important.
And it's totally important, Robbie, because the global financial crisis has not been solved. As you said before, the Australian banks are in a dire circumstance because of their reliance on the mortgage market. So what is coming down, Robbie, is the fact that we actually have to urgently have Glass-Steagall in place, otherwise we're going to end up in chaos in this country.
Yep.
And that's what we're trying to put into place here as quickly as possible, and it's best to have this policy put in place before you get to that sort of mess, because it's going to be a total disaster if you start to see a crash of the entire system without this policy in place.
So if you're a regular viewer of the CEC report, or just view for the first time, but you support this policy, don't just sit there, actually write the letters, right? And you will participate in us making a big stink about this, which we should do. And if you need to, call in to get a free copy of the Australian Alert Service, which has the instructions on doing this. Though, let's take a break, Craig, and we're going to change the subject to talk about Syria afterwards. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, Prayer for Palmyra concert celebrates victory of hope over terror. So, Craig, something quite extraordinary happened on the 5th of May. There was a concert held, a classical concert held in the ancient amphitheatre of the ancient city of Palmyra in Syria. Now, viewers probably recognise this story. This city, it was a disaster when it fell to ISIS last year, because we know ISIS and like the Taliban, these Sunni jihadis who follow Wahhabism, they tend to destroy all these ancient sites, right? They don't think anything's valid before their time. So this fell. When it fell, it was reported all over the world big time. It was a big news event. And of course, one of the things that was reported that the archaeologist in charge of the antiquities there, whose name was Dr. Khalid al-Assad, ISIS put him to death, right, at this, beheaded him at this place. There was a sense of dread in the international community about what would happen to this site. Well, the good news was, in March, Russian air support helped the Syrian army liberate Palmyra from ISIS, right? And this was a fantastic thing. It turned out that while it had some destruction, most of it was still intact, which was great. So why we're highlighting it though is that although the Western media did report it, they downplayed how significant this was because they don't like giving Russia credit for anything, right? And it got even nastier than that. So what Russia did is they conducted a concert. And we want to play a little bit of that concert in a second, but just the concert was dedicated to the memory of Dr. al-Assad and also a young Russian Special Forces soldier whose job was to scout ahead, identify the targets and call in the airstrikes. And this is an incredible story of bravery because he found himself surrounded. His position was completely surrounded. His name was Lieutenant Alexander Prokorenko. His position was surrounded by ISIS soldiers, and he called in the airstrike on his own position. And he said, and we don't have time to go through the transcript, but he said, "Tell my family I love them, but you've got to do this." And they said, no, don't go back behind the green line, go back to safety. He said, no, I'm surrounded anyway. You've got to do this. They're going to do worse to me if they capture me. You've got to do this. And he called in this airstrike and it destroyed this ISIS grouping, but it also killed him, right? And it was an incredible act of bravery which helped liberate this place. So with that in mind, let's just take a minute and listen to a brief excerpt of this concert where one of Russia's leading violinists is playing Bach. So Craig, that was obviously beautiful, but contrast that to what ISIS used this amphitheatre for. And you can see this picture in exactly the same location. They conducted mass executions there, and you can see the Syrian soldiers about to be executed. But that was terrible. But listen to this. The United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, responded to this event, this concert, and he called it the concert, quote, "a tasteless attempt to distract attention from the continued suffering of millions of Syrians. It shows that there are no depths to which the regime, that is Russia, will not sink." What is your response?
Well, the British have freaked out, Robbie. They are absolutely biting themselves. That's a bite your ass type comment by...
Chew the rug.
Chew the rug, bite your ass type comment. I want to say that in crude terms because the fact is that the British are upset that their plans are failing in this sector of the world because of what the Russians have done.
They're behind the regime change agenda that Russia has stopped here.
That's right, and that's what you see here. That's all I can say about it, as strongly as that.
But despite that, the concert showed that terrorism is being pushed back. But that's all we've got time for. Thanks for tuning into this week's CEC Report. Get involved in Operation Glass-Steagall. Tune in next week for more.
You've been watching the CEC Report, the weekly TV show of the Citizens Electoral Council of Australia. What can people do to find out more, Robert?
Well, they can get on our website, www.cecaust.com.au, or they can call our toll-free number for Lisa to order a copy of this, the Australian Alert Service, which is our weekly publication where we write up all the material we use. That number is 1-800-636-432.